welcome to NewLife Apologetics. I'm Jeremy Bushnell, and I'm here with my friend Tanner Dean. And we just want to talk about why apologetics. Tanner, I think one thing we see in the church in America today is the Old Testament and the New Testament are almost separate books that don't, that represent two separate entities. Like there's the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament, or Jesus came in the New Testament, and they don't really interact well together. The God of the Old Testament is wrathful and mean and cruel, and Jesus is just really nice and friendly and talks about love.
Almost two different religions.
Sure. Yeah, and if it's two different religions, why do Christians even have the Old Testament? The reason why we want to do apologetics is to help engage people into understanding, well, wait a minute,
Right.
there's a reason we have the Old Testament. There's a reason Jesus talked about the Old Testament, and the disciples talked about the Old Testament, and Paul talked about the Old Testament, and the first Christian believers were actually not Christians. They were Jews who found their Messiah.
Kind of how the concept of Paul and Jesus teaching, but directly from the Old Testament, saying, hey, this is how things work now,
Yes.
rather than culturally how things worked then.
Right. And one of the things, speaking of cultures now in America today, is we see famous Christians like Lauren Daigle, for example. I don't want to throw her under the bus. All respect for her, and she has a wonderful platform, and I'm glad she's able to use it. But she was challenged with a question, and she stuttered. Not that stuttering's bad. Moses stuttered, but she stuttered because she didn't know how to answer it. Not that she was verbally incapable of answering it, but she was scripturally incapable of giving an answer. And we could talk more about that in a later time. This is kind of an introduction as to why we want to do apologetics. And any other thoughts on why we want to do apologetics?
It's for both the believer and the lost. We want to equip those who believe and empower them, and also we want to bring the gospel to the people who don't know, who haven't heard.
Yes.
And in a way that makes sense, and a way that's tangible, and where nothing is omitted.
Good. Yeah, I like the way Ravi Zacharias says it. He says to help the thinker believe and to help the believer think. And when Jesus gave us the greatest commandment, and it was to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself, most Christians are able to quote, hey, Jesus said to love your neighbor as yourself. Well, yes, but what's the first half of that? And to love the Lord your God with all your mind. Well, then we should be engaging our minds with the gospel as well, and with non-believers. And both those verses, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, Jesus was quoting from the Old Testament. Love your neighbor as yourself came from Leviticus, and love the Lord your God came from Deuteronomy.
Well, that's kind of the basis. That's kind of the basics right now. I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, me too. And next week we should have another friend with us. Stephen Bennett will be joining us, and he's going to really dive into the Old Testament with us. Another thing I guess I kind of want to bring up now, since this is the introductory video, is what are some basic objections, not only in Christianity and why we've disconnected the Old Testament from the New Testament, but some objections that we face that are hard to answer.
Things that a lot of Christians can stumble over, like the question of homosexuality, or so many of these cultural, I guess, trends that are calling into question the validity of the Bible.
Well, and also I would say Christian hypocrisy in the past is one that is often a challenge. Like, so Luther, for example, Martin Luther, who was the first reformer, he's the one that, nailed the 99 Theses or whatever it was, and broke away from Rome. Yeah, started the Protestant Reformation. He was anti-Semitic. What's his name? Jonathan Edwards apparently owned slaves and defended slavery. And so there's Christian hypocrisy that always kind of looks like, well, that can't be true because I saw this person doing that. And of course we can defend that apologetically as well. But Some other easy objections that I've faced before is, well, the Bible was written by man. Well, the Bible was written a long time ago. Well, okay. And there's easy answers to those things, when you start
Sure.
dealing with them. You mentioned the issue of homosexuality. There's just so many little things that a lot of Christians aren't ready to deal with when they're faced with the question. It's like, well, I just trust Jesus and I know that. And that's good, don't get me wrong. Yes, absolutely, that's my answer. It's actually because I trust God, because I trust Jesus for salvation, that I'm willing to engage those questions, because I don't have doubt, because I know that God didn't lie to me. I know that God is good, and so I start with those two assumptions also.
Right, there's
God.
that connection from here to here.
Yes. Yeah, the head to the heart connection. God is good. God's not going to lie to me. Jesus is who he said he is. I start, and I'll admit that that's a bias. I start with that presupposition or bias. But then that allows me to engage those tough questions from that perspective. And that's all we have for this week. So next week we have a lot more exciting things to talk about.
Look forward to videos hopefully every week.
Yeah. God bless you guys.